Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Thank you, Zia. Thank you, Caitlin. Thank you to the team of very prestigious Baker Institution and colleagues at Department of Peace and Conflict Studies. And to the entire Juniata community, I wouldn't have known how unique and great this institution is if I had not visited here. So luckily my flights worked and I'm here. Thank you for all of you for being here with us today. You will notice that I'm going to be speaking on Ukraine war from Asian perspective. And I'm already introduced. What I'm going to do in my next 15 minutes is to look at what Ukraine war is doing to international relations theory. This happens when technology decides to play fool with you. If you transfer it on email, sometimes slides. So what it means for international relations theory, again from Asian perspective. What it means for actual international relations or affairs. And then of course what it means for Asian nations, particularly big and small Asian nations. And then of course finally looking at India's perspective to close my discussion. The first one on international relations theory, you heard Dr. Maru also mentioned this being primarily great powers contestation or major powers contest. Now, difficulty is that in international relations theory, the positivist mainstream realism, for example, believes that major powers will always be in contestation because of international system being perceived as anarchy. Now, that international system is dynamic, and therefore they also believe that whereas the status quo powers over period will decline, there will be new ascendant, aspirant major powers. And that makes the dynamics a little more complex than a simple contestation. What makes it still more interesting is also the fact that status quo declining powers are often anxiety prone, are impatient, compared to ascendant aspiring states being far more cautious and far more patient. And therefore, you can see that we live in a world where we still assume Russia and the United States to be those status quo powers who are on decline, and I include United States. The discussion on relative decline of United States is almost now 2 decades old. It's a gradual decline. Ascendant, aspirant states, and since I come from Asia, would be countries like China and India. And you can see Ukraine war again is showcasing their behavior in a certain fashion. For international relations theory, I think it's again interesting to see how there are lessons. Ukraine, when it separated from Soviet Union or Russia, was the 3rd largest nuclear weapon state. It of course gave up those nuclear weapons. Now, what are the lessons of Ukraine war? Where you see a country called North Korea with limited number of weapons can make US president travel twice to Asia to shake hands with that dictator. Does it mean that now it's also going to give a lesson that countries should actually pursue nuclear weapons far more seriously than they have done so far? Lessons to Iran or the It could also mean definition of what makes a country powerful also open for discussion, because when Germany and Japan became great economic success stories, they were not seen as great powers, whereas China, when China becomes an economic success, is seen as a great power. Simply because we live in a very different era, when the total focus on military power has moved away to Joseph Nye's works about soft power, diffusion of power, smart power, sharp power. Power itself is very differently defined. And of course, unlike Japan and West Germany, who were kind of partners of United States or junior partners of United States, China is seen as a challenge. So what makes a country power and enter that major powers club itself is very interesting way it is defined. Another theory which is popular in international relations is democratic peace theory. You could go back to Thomas Paine or Immanuel Kant, or more recently to Michael Dellon or David Singh. The basic belief is that democracies are usually reluctant to initiate wars. Now, are we saying then that Ukraine is not a democracy or Russia is not a democracy? The point I'm making here is now we are in an era of very huge, diverse types of democracies. And amongst them, you are hearing now of majoritarian democracies, let me say authoritarian democracies. What that means to this basic theory in international relations that believes democracies are less inclined to war. Then, of course, the very institution of war, which is at the center of international relations. War on one hand, peace on the other. I heard in the morning, war, Zia said, is something which is a problem, and peace is something which has to be worked upon. It applies to all of us in everyday life. But in international relations, war until about 18th century, before Industrial Revolution, was largely mercenaries-led, and soldiers fought for profits. And then, of course, Industrial Revolution resulted in standing armies being created, because you could create that kind of armies in peace times as well. You could pay them salaries, equip them with weapons, give them residences. It seems we are reverting back to 18th century is what Ukraine teaches us. Because before that, Iraq warsaw, US using almost 100,000 soldiers from private security companies who were not part of the state. They were part of profit-making private companies. And now in Ukraine, we have gone a step further. We call them volunteers. They are not even representing any legally registered companies. You could just be someone who loves, shooting targets of human beings. You could be a sniper. You could go there. Therefore, we now talk of what is proxy plus war, where Ukraine, in my limited understanding, would not have withstood more than 7 days against Russia, thanks to what I call proxy plus war, supported by West. So it's a contest between West, led by United States, divided house a great extent. I know the range of opinions that European countries hold and how much they are supporting United States in that fight, but enormous amount of money being devoted, resources, defense equipment, weapons, information warfare, cyber warfare, legal warfare, propaganda warfare, and snipers. I don't want to name countries. I'm traveling between two which have sent out of them. So that kind of contestation has very little to do with Ukraine, which is devastating. So it's a 20th century war. It's not a 21st century war. It's a 20th century war. And therefore, war itself is getting redefined. And we are now reaching a point where volunteers could go and do things the way they want. And that central institution that was ultimate instrument of protecting national sovereignty itself is getting into confusion. Military-industrial complex, I need to move a little fast forward, is another interesting area to look at how actual affairs on the ground are happening. 5 top nations, Russia, actually United States 30% itself, plus Russia, and plus France, Israel. 5 top exporters export 77% of total weapons around the world. India is now claiming certain share of 0.2% of exports, mostly non-lethal. Now, military-industrial complex around the world has enormous power to decide that countries should continue to kill each other, because they make profits out of it. They have enormous endowments in various places. Of course, they also promote, all kinds of social welfare activities. But why it is a simple question that none of the terrorist organizations around the world are having any dearth of weapons ever. No terrorist organization has closed down, we have no weapons anymore. So even the non-state actors get access to weapons produced in some of the most developed nations. So how does military industrial complex decides that wars will continue and Russia and Ukraine will continue to fight? Good recent examples, $4.5 billion sanctioned to support exporting weapons from US to Eastern Europe, $2 billion for Pakistan, $2 billion for another country. So military industrial complex deciding countries will or will not fight, which countries will fight with what weapons. Battlefields are also often exhibition grounds. Iraq war raised exports of weapons from the United States enormously because it was seen as a success. Russia's weapons are not going to be sellable. Most countries, depending on Russia, will have to now think of shrinking, buying Russian technologies. More specific everyday life, food, fuel, fertilizers shortages. Sri Lanka, in India's neighborhood, this summer for about 3 months had absolutely no government function. Because of this food, fuel, fertilizer shortage, 30% of food grain exports are from Belarus and Ukraine and Russia. But Russia is the largest energy supplier. So that kind of disruption is making politics really impossible in many of the countries. Very quickly, Asian perspectives. Putin has enormous support in Asia. Many people don't realize that because what you live in a place where we are doing sort of anti-Russian propaganda we are doing all the time. Collective Security Treaty Organization, 10 members are with him, as much with him as Europeans are with the United States. Then, of course, he recently went to attend Shanghai Cooperation Organization. 15 other countries are there with Putin, at least accepting him to come in and sit and talk with him. That kind of support, particularly China and India. China has actually shot up purchase of fuel. India has also raised purchase of fuel. 2 countries where Putin had visited before this Ukraine operation, so-called special military operations begin, are New Delhi and Beijing. He came to New Delhi on 6th of December for a 6-hour visit from airport to the meeting and back to airport. Less than 3 weeks before operations began in Ukraine, he was in Beijing signing a joint statement which underlines no limit partnership between China and Russia. So China and Russia in that sense are in certain amount of close cooperation with, and in fact West is now complaining that perhaps China and India are financing Putin's war in Ukraine, to which Indian Foreign Minister keeps explaining that Europe always is buying far more energy from Russia, even with the reduced numbers. And that India buys more oil from United States, even with the increased figure from Russia right now. And imagine Russia has an old relationship with India, with the United States, with the more recent threat. So in that sense, it looks like the things are complex. For example, China from initial great support is now becoming reluctant. I think this was also underlined. India, on the other hand, is kind of becoming also far more cautious. Iran's drones are being used by Russia, is a more recent news, or Russia is looking for help from North Korea. So let's not forget, we may love or hate Russia, or Putin is a separate matter, but he has a large number of countries with him as well. And then, of course, you could look at his friends in Africa and Latin America and other places. European nations also have countries which are soft on Putin. You can at least look at a dozen countries in European continent where you will find that the kind of responses are extremely soft on understanding the security concerns of the Indian perspectives, and I need to perhaps move faster. What I have called Indian response to Ukraine is proactive neutrality, where India has constantly, and that is the standard Indian policy. You can see that in Afghanistan also. And India does not wish to wait until the big sheriffs, the big leaders are beginning to talk to each other and resolve issues. It wants to focus things on the ground, irrespective of whether the big top leaders are in talking terms or not. So in Afghanistan, for example, India was not talking to Pakistan for about 7 years, opened negotiations with Pakistan just for this purpose, to allow land route to send food grains to Afghanistan. Likewise in Ukraine, India has sent about 12 consignments, including 100 tons of medicines and other equipment to Ukraine. That is continuing. At the same time, Indian leaders at all levels, foreign minister, prime minister, are constantly talking to both President Zelensky and President Putin, constantly asking them to cease violence as soon as possible. And that's a policy which China also pursues. And of course, come to talking terms and begin dialogue as soon as possible. So that kind of two-level approach is what is being followed. I call it proactive approach. India, in that sense, is also aware of compulsions. India-China relations are complex and lately tense for the last 2+ years because we had a little violent face-off on the border. In that context, India pushing Russia too far is going to be counterproductive for India because Russia will be pushed that close to China, and that's not going to be good for India's security. So therefore, India has to very clearly create that fine balance between how far it keeps nudging, pushing, convincing President Putin to stop doing things that he is doing. And the language that India has followed in doing this exercise and make it look like extremely dynamic. Indian neutrality becomes very dynamic because you have to only look at speeches made by Indian representatives at United Nations, or also speeches made by foreign minister or prime minister on this subject of Ukraine. The words used over a period of time are listed here. India began by saying we are very concerned with so-called special military operations in Ukraine. Next week, India moved to saying, no, we regret what is happening there. Then we said, we deplore what is happening on the ground. Then we said, both countries should respect United Nations Charter. Then we expanded it to say they should respect international law. Then we moved to saying we need to protect national sovereignty for all countries. Then we moved to very specifically territorial integrity without calling names. And then, of course, when Boka massacre took place, India said in UN Security Council that India would support an independent international investigation as to what happened on the ground. And India was usually abstaining from all UN Security Council or General Assembly resolutions on Ukraine. But on end of August, when Russia proposed that they should, on procedural grounds, disallow President Zelensky from speaking, India voted against this resolution. And then, of course, this was followed by Indian Prime Minister in the last SCO meeting in September, telling very clearly that in a bilateral meeting, that this is not an era of war. And this was enormously quoted in Western media, also quoted in UN General Assembly by other speakers. So in that sense, that kind of has seen India being gradually becoming far more sharper in terms of giving its message. And of course, it has cost to India. Because for a long time we have seen United States and European allies are not happy with India's response, but believe me, Russia also is not happy with India's response. So sometimes when you're trying to placate both sides, it's not an easy exercise. And Indian foreign policy has moved from non-alignment to multi-alignment, building partnership with as many sectors in as many countries as possible. And that's a very difficult exercise. Very quickly, 30 seconds more. West Asia is a great example. India is a great friend of Saudi Arabia, Iran, UAE, Israel, countries that don't see eye to eye with each other. So when the United States wants to create a second quad after Indo-Pacific quad in West Asia, it picks up Israel and UAE, United States and India. So there is a very definitive example of success of that kind of very careful calibration that Indian foreign policy has done. But of course, it's not only having cost for India, it has cost to all of us, nations and individuals. The cost of everyday life in Canada, I'm told repeatedly, has gone up enormously. I believe some effect must have happened in the United States. And that's not an easy way to continue living with that kind of situation. 7 months of war is unusual. Nobody expected war to start, but absolutely no one expected it to continue for 7 months. Last 10 seconds extension. My understanding at this stage, you go to Tsarist Russia, you go to Soviet Russia, you go to Putin's Russia, West Russia. Security has always been understood historically in Russia in terms of creating buffers around its borders. So if you don't give Putin the whole of Ukraine, he will definitely take the ethnic Russian areas, the 4 areas which is already declared as part of South Russia. One way to close that war, if you understand history, would be to give a face saver to President Putin. And he's not going to stop war without it. How we give that face saver, how do we explain it to Western domestic constituencies is a challenge for Western countries which are continuing with that campaign against President Putin. Thank you so much.